Hi, I'm Sally Madding, and this is part 3 of a 5-part video series for those who have never painted in watercolor before. Video 1 covered watercolor basics, video 2 covered the common techniques, and this video will cover washes, including flat washes, graded or gradated washes, and a variegated wash, and we'll also cover glazing. Now we're going to talk about what not to do. Here's an example of a wash that's okay, and the most common thing that I'm seeing is either streakiness or these what are called blooms or cauliflowers or back runs. And this is where water has been dropped into a reasonable wash and it's partly dry and it forces the pigment back and creates, it can look beautiful but mostly ugly. And back runs where you don't pick up the bead at the base of the paper, but I'll be showing that with the example of how to do it in a second. This is where the brush has been loaded and you get these streaky problems, and that could be a mismatch also of the amount of water when you're first wetting the paper. You can see there's a few areas that have skipped, so that could be another problem. And then like a last one is more of a glazing. There are 2 layers on top of here, and the first one was not completely dry before they went over it again. And then the last problem, which I see often, is the streakiness, and this could be speed problems. This one also has a handprint in it, so oil and water don't mix, and this happens particularly on the student paper, not so much on the good paper. Now we're going to do a flat wash, and the first thing I've done is adhere the paper down to a piece of cardboard, and this is 100% cotton paper. And it has to say 100% cotton on it. If it doesn't, it's not. And this is blue tape that I got from Home Depot. No worries about that, but it has to be really adhered well. I even run my thumb along those edges to make sure it's really well adhered. If you don't, you're going to end up with a wash that's going to look like this, where water can get underneath, or it can buckle and it'll pool here, and you can see this is not a good wash. So hopefully we can do a good one now. So to do a flat wash, I've got a flat brush. You can do it with a small one, but you're going to end up with lots and lots of streaks. So doing it with the right size brush helps. Rule of thumb is if the piece of paper is bigger than my palm, I always do it wet in wet. I try and do it with the appropriate size. This is about 5 by 3. I'll use a 1-inch brush. Obviously, if I was doing a wash the size of this piece of paper, I would use a 1.5. Bigger than that, I would use a 2-inch. I'm using a blend. I probably wouldn't use the synthetic. It doesn't hold enough volume, I don't find. But this is a blend, I think, of goat and synthetic. First off, I'm going to wet the paper with I'm really scooping that water out. And you can hopefully see a bead that's coming down. My paper is leaning at about 15-degree angle. It's on a little support block, and I'm trying to be consistent with how I wet it. I don't want to miss any areas. And then when I get to the bottom, I'm going to make a thirsty brush by patting it on a tissue and sucking up that excess at the bottom. The next thing I'm going to need to do is to make a color. This is quinacridone rose, and it's a non-granulating staining pigment. And you need to make sure that you've got enough wash. You don't want to run out halfway through. And I'm going to wait about a minute before I put my wash on there, because it will just run down so fast if it's extremely soppy. And I want the paper to be just starting to lose its shine. Is the perfect time to add it. So I think that's probably been around a minute. I'm loading my brush. I'm not shaking it off or anything. I'm just literally taking what's in the brush and going straight here. See, it's even still running down, but that's okay. We can manage this. We need to work reasonably fast and let the beads overlap, although the bead is hard to see when it's really wet and wet. It's much more apparent wet on dry. So now you can see I've got a giant bead at the bottom and a bubble. So now I'm going to make my brush much drier, and I'm going to vacuum up the bead at the bottom. I can see I've got a little bubble there too. And see, it's still continuing to cascade down on this 15-degree slope, and I can just barely touch it with my thirsty brush, or you could even use a corner of a piece of dry tissue. And I might need to babysit this for a minute or two. I can see there's a little tiny hair up there, but I'm not going to worry about that. So I think that will leave a nice, smooth, even wash. And if I go to the top now, I will ruin it. I need to get in, get out, and leave it alone. So if I go back in, it's toast. So I'm just touching the bottom. That's the only thing I'm doing. And I need a dry tissue to... Okay, I think we can call that a reasonable flat wash. Now we're going to do the same thing, wet on dry. So I haven't wet the paper. I've got a nice big puddle. Need to be sure I've got enough. It's going to need more because it's going to absorb more. And you'll be able to see the bead this time. And that's what I'm talking about by the bead. And I'm going to overlap these. And speed is important. I'm just dipping into that puddle and coming straight back over and overlapping it. You can see it's on the edge of the blue paper. And that's getting to be a lot, so I'm just going to vacuum some up, controlling that bead. And then the last one, I just need to clean up the area so nothing bleeds back. So now we're going to do a wash with a granulating pigment. This is French ultramarine blue. It's got sediment in it, and it's going to be settling on the palette as well as on the paper. So I have to keep this homogenized each time I go back and forth to my wash. And I wet this area, and it's been about a minute and a half, and water seeped under the tape and has made a bit of a bloom on this one above. And I got a little speck up there too. So these washes are delicate creatures. So I'm going to pick up the blue, and you can see I already had it granulating, and I need to keep it homogenized. And now I am going to lay it across here in exactly the same manner and do a wet on wet with a granulating pigment French ultramarine blue. And there we get to the bottom. And you can see the mottled pattern that it leaves behind. What's happening is those little sediments are actually going into the valleys of the paper. And it becomes more and more pronounced as more settle into those little valleys. So I'm just making a thirsty brush and babysitting this for a minute or two until it's finished draining down. And while that is doing that, I'll keep a close eye on it, and I will do it wet on dry on this side, but I'm going to have to make up more pigment. And we need to work fast because it's settling. So faster than I did the one above. Just pick up that one more time. Okay, so go. So it's about as fast as I can do it physically. And the faster that you do it, the better. Oh, I did it too fast. It even skipped. Just bringing that bead down as fast as I can manage. And that will give me the best result. But I still think this is going to be your, when you're learning, best to do it wet and wet. Picking up the excess. And that will conclude flat washes, and next we'll be going on to doing a graded wash. Now we're going to do a graded wash, but before we do that I wanted to show you a flat wash which was done with primary colours, obviously just a sphere, And if you then do a graded wash in the sphere, it gives it dimension. So this is the reason why we need to really learn how to do a graded wash. So I've pre-wet the paper, and I'm going to go from light to dark here. So I have 2 puddles of paint, my quinacridone rose, and then just a puddle of clean water. And I'm going to take a little bit of the pink and mix it in, quinacridone rose, and do the first level. Then I'm going to sort of repeat that pattern, just adding a little bit more pink each time. Permanent rose, rather. I keep saying pink, I should call it permanent rose. And I'll get to the point where they're at the same concentration. Of course, it's running down the side, making my life difficult. And now I need to actually go to the more concentrated. And again, got a big puddle happening here. So let's make that more concentrated. And now I'm going to do it the other way around, and I'm going to start really concentrated and go to much lighter. Okay, so now really concentrated at the top, and I will add a puddle of clean water over here to it. So there's my concentrated at the top. So I'm going to add a little bit more water. Oh, too slowly, because I can see I've got a line, so I have to tip it a little more and be a little bit more consistent with my mixes. More water, make sure it's homogeneous, overlap that bead, a bit more water, overlap that bead, and this one's flooding down on the other side. So now I really need to be dilute. And the last one I need to do is going to be water only. And you can see what's happened, that the water has graded down and actually diluted this one out somewhat. So I need to vacuum up the bead. But we've got the reverse thing happening. But I think this one is probably a little bit more easy to control. So I just have to babysit them for a minute. I see I'm getting a little tiny bloom under there. But you have to decide which way you like it. From light to dark or dark to light. And of course, if you prefer just one way, you can turn it the other way up. And of course, just makes the same thing the other way around. Now we're going to do a variegated wash, and how that's different from a graded wash is we're going to be changing color this time. I'm going to be using 3 pigments in this instance. We're going to be doing a sunset in the background, and a graded wash is usually from dark to light, so it's a change in value. Hi doggy. So this is the sort of thing I'm going to be doing. This is going from blue to pinks to oranges to yellows, but I'm not going to paint it from dark to light because I don't want the blue to run down all the way to my yellow. So I'm actually going to paint it upside down and start from the lightest color going to the darkest. And here's another example of a lovely sunset. Again, I would paint it going from the yellows, which is our lightest color, to the blue. So I've got 3 little puddles here, and I'm going to start with the yellow, put that one down. The paper is already wet and it's just lost its shine, so it's perfect. I'm going to pick up the yellow, and then I'm going to start mixing it with this permanent rose to make an orange, and then I will swap to this one and mix it with the purple. I don't want my orange to mix with my purple secondary because that will make grey. So that's why I've got 2 separate puddles. Okay, let's see if we can do it. So I'm using a smaller brush because I've got a lot of colors to change. So a slightly bigger piece of paper. So now I'm going to add my oranges across and gradually get darker and darker. Of course, it's running down that side this time. Wouldn't that be the case? And let's That's about as much oranges as I can manage. So now I'm going on to the more pinks. Puddle those together for a sec. More pinks. And it's annoying me that that's going to change it. There we go, some more pinks. And of course my little pink puddle ran out. Story of my life. So now I can start adding the blue to the pink, but I don't want that to mix with the orange because the orange and the purple will make it dull. So now I'm at plain pink only, permanent rose. Now I'm going to add a little bit of blue to that. And we're gradually making an upside down sunset. I don't know that now I think I just want blue. I want to get as close as I can to blue sky. So I think I might just do blue all by itself right at the end. Got to make sure I've got the right concentration though, because if it gets to be too dilute, it'll cause a background. So I'm still overlapping that bead, but that's finally pushed it into the blue. And I'll just back up the bead. And my sunset is now upside down. So there would be the sunset, and that would be where we could put trees or whatever you want in your foreground. Now we're going to do a texture variegated wash. But before we start that, I want to show you that this one has had one more coat of color put over it, from the yellow through the oranges, pinks, red, violets to the violet and blue. And if you compare this with this, you can see that that could simulate a sunset, and then I could put my deep dark black greens over the top and that would suggest a silhouette, and I might even get to doing that. Okay, so now we're going to do the texture variegated wash. I'm going to turn my paper this time this way. I'm going to do a gradation going from one color to another, but also adding texture as I go. So let's just jump right in and do it. I've pre-wetted the paper. The shine has just disappeared off the paper. And I'm going to be using Phthalo blue green shade. And then I've got some French ultramarine blue. So I'm going to work from one to the other. I'm going to work somewhat diagonally because that tends to be a little bit more dynamic. And I'm just going to put in some color. I'm going to leave some white areas as well. And maybe I can get a little bit more volume there. And this time I think I actually am going to work flat. And now I'm going to start adding the other blue in. So I'm sort of mixing them together. A little bit over there. And you see that I'm using the brush sort of sideways and not flat this time, so that there's some texture going on. Now I'm getting into much darker bluer over here, even darker. I might even go into some indigo. So I've got three blues, phthalo through ultramarine to indigo. And it's kind of dry down here, so I want to have some wet areas. So this has got lots of texture going on, but I want to have that color repeated over here and this color over there. So that'll unify the colors. So I think I might actually tap some on. Of course it's going on the other one, but that's just how it goes. So I will blot this one, but I think it's going to remain spotty. Should have covered it over. That's how it goes. So I've got some colours here, so I'll try the other method of spattering, not tapping. And I'm going to put some of the French Ultra in as well. See, that one's not jumping all over the place. That's better. And then I can do a bit of the Phthalo blue-green shade as well. And so we've got everything repeated everywhere, going from lighter to darker, from blue-green through reddish blue to a grayish blue. And I'm getting a little bit of a puddle in the middle, but maybe that's kind of fun to let things drain around. And then when the shine is starting to disappear off the paper, I'm going to add some salt to it, which will add some more texture. And then I might do what's called the fingertip, I call the fingertip spritz. So if you don't get the salt on at the right time, and it needs to have just lost its shine, you can do the fingertip spritz and it'll give you almost the same effect. So I'm tipping it the other way now. I'm going to add some salt. Sometimes I even add 2 types of salt. This is big salt. This is rock salt. Just regular table salt will give you a smaller texture. I need to pick up these little edges along here. And then the fingertip spritz is just a little bit early for that now. I almost need to wait for this to incubate. So we might have to wait perhaps another 1.5 to 2 minutes. While I'm waiting for the salt to do the stuff, I might as well put in a silhouette suggesting this over here. So I'm going to suggest some trees by doing some dry brushing. Just with a very see if this is ready for the fingertip spritz now, and it is. So I'm going to dip my fingers in as far as the knuckles, shake the excess off, and I'm going to do a flick, as if I'm literally throwing that water through the table. And it has an instant effect, but it's softer generally than the salt. Okay, so now my variegated textured wash has dried, and the colors are all mixed. And let's just focus on this section for a minute. You can see the salt action over here. Some of them didn't quite dissolve, and salt did over here. It was a little bit wetter, but we've got a gradation going on. But this is a truly variegated wash, and you get the feeling of the texture. This feels even like snowflakes. This might make a great little winter scene. And then the other one which we were working on, remember we started with this scenery as our inspiration. It's a photo in Needham, and this is what I did with it. I was doing, you saw me starting to do the dry brush effect. We're using Perelyne green or burnt sienna and phthalo blue, and then I went over it with an even more concentrated, darker version. And the spatters that were in the way, which I didn't care for so much, which were an oops from doing that, you can go over with an X-Acto knife and pick off some of those, and then with an eraser you can lift out a few stars. And then here there was a big spatter, and I've cleaned that up by just scratching it, and that's kind of become a moon. And I think that would work as a, you know, cute little card. It's not a very big piece. So showing now what these variegated washes can look like, I've done a couple. This one is obviously a value study because there's only one color. And this is obviously a variegated wash at the back with texture. These are graded washes within the actual little pears. And then the shelf that the pears are sitting on was done as a flat wash. And then the graded wash is the shadow of those pears. And then of course this is the version, the same thing in color. There was a little bleed here, but I think it's quite effective. Now we're returning back to our flat washes at the beginning, and I'm going to show you how to glaze on them, which is really a wash on top of a wash that's already dry. So I'm going to draw a line across here and show you how we will do that, but we need to be able to do a wash around a silly shape, and it's a wash and a glaze. Glaze being the second layer. So let's do something a little bit more simple. Let's do a square to start with. It's a little bit more difficult to do a circle, so I'll demo those. And to do something that's more difficult shape, organic shape, it's best to do that with a round brush, but the square I probably can manage with the flat brush. So I'm going to do this wet on dry, and got to keep 2 beads going this time. Now this is a new brush and it's shedding. So you can see 2 beads on both sides now. You need to bring them down at the same time, and they will meet underneath. You don't want to create a square around there first, because that will leave a line, and this was a back bleed from the water going underneath my tape there. So we've created a kind of lilac, because you're seeing both the blue and the pink, because the light is going through the colours, bouncing off the white of the paper and coming right back into my eyes. So I got a little spot in the middle there. Just going to make him disappear. And for this one, it's a little more difficult to do it with a flat brush. So you might want to see, once you've practiced all these other things, you may be able to feel comfortable to do it with a round brush. And again, it's the same principle. You need to form that bead. And now we really need to be cautious about going round our circle, bringing that bead down simultaneously. As long as this front is wet here, your wash will be good. So I'm trying to get as round a circle as I can manage. And gradually getting to the point where I can join them up. And now I can do the backwards and forwards that you could continue with a flat brush now, but I've got it in my round brush, so I'll do it with my round brush as well. And so that shows you how to do it around an organic thing. So that would be the order I would practice it in, and then you can draw an amoeba or something and really get complicated. And to show you some other examples that I've done, here's an amoeba. This was a yellow glaze over the top of a wash. This was originally yellow wash, then you glaze on top. And here this is the same thing, but with burnt sienna and some buildings or just rectangles. So you have to pick up the beads in all of those areas. So what's important with doing the glazing is the transparency of the colors. And how do you know how transparent or opaque they are? Is you have to do a black line with India ink, let that dry completely, and then paint a swatch of each color over the top. If they're transparent, you'll still be able to see the black through. If they're opaque, like this lavender color here, it will leave this residue over the top of the black. So you can see that yellow ochre up here, that is opaque. And sometimes there's a little bit of residue. You can see a touch maybe here on the Windsor yellow. So I've got ST, semi-transparent. And T stands for transparent, and O, or omega is here, I've got here, stands for opaque. And so this is how I determine which ones are transparent and which are opaque. And if you start with opaque, that's okay. You can then do transparent on top. But if you do opaque over opaque over opaque, that's how you make mud. Because each time you're going to cut down on the luminosity of the amount of light that can bounce off the white paper. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and if you like my video and want to see more, please consider donating to Patreon at the link below. If you'd like to see some of my artwork, check out my website at the link above, and if you have any questions, please contact me at sallymenning@gmail.com.